Hi, I'm Arabella, a storyteller on YouTube. This story is inspired by real relationship confessions and has been fictionalized for storytelling purposes. Names, details, and events have been changed. If this story moves you, or if you see a part of yourself in it, please like the video and subscribe to support my channel. Now, let's begin. When the lawyer slid the garden deed to my sister, my stepfather smiled like the funeral had finally started paying off. Then he pushed one rusty key across the table and said the shed behind my grandmother's orchard was mine, like he was tipping a waitress, not dividing a life. They walked out with the house, the savings, the antiques, the land everyone could brag about. I walked out with a warped door, a cold floor, and a key my grandmother had hidden for a reason. The room still smelled like lilies and coffee from the church hall next door. That was the first thing I remember. Not the paperwork, not the numbers, not even my sister's nails tapping the table while the attorney read line after line in that soft professional voice people use when they want greed to sound organized. I remember flowers that were already starting to turn sweet and rotten at the edges, and I remember thinking that somehow the room smelled exactly like the last week of my grandmother's life, beautiful on the surface, exhausted underneath. My grandmother, Evelyn Hart, had spent 40 years building that property into something people in town pointed at when they drove by. The white farmhouse sat high enough to catch the evening light. Behind it were rows of apple trees, a packing barn, an irrigation ditch that ran clean most of the year, and a gravel lane that cut through the side parcel and connected to the service road. There was money in the land, money in the fruit contracts, money in the antique furniture, money in the old truck, money in the small account she kept in her business name. My sister Dana, I wanted the house because it photographed well. My stepfather, Leon, wanted the land because land sounded important when he talked to other men. I think both of them believed grief could be managed if the paperwork came out in the right order. The attorney kept reading. Main residence to Dana. Orchard income account to Dana. Farm equipment and truck to Leon as surviving spouse by transfer agreement. House contents to be divided according to attached schedule. Every sentence landed in the same place. Them. My name did not appear until the end, and when it did, the attorney paused just enough for everyone to feel how small it sounded. A detached storage structure located on the west boundary of the Hart property, together with the immediate ground beneath it, is conveyed separately to Nora Hale. Dana almost laughed. Leon did not bother hiding his smile. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands over his stomach like a man settling into the ending he had been promised. Then he picked up the key, looked at it once, and nudged it across the polished table toward me. "Your grandma always knew you liked old junk," he said. Old junk. That was the phrase. Not memory, not history, not trust. Junk. I looked at the key and said nothing, because by then I understood something they did not. They were ready for crying. They were ready for anger. They were ready for me to raise my voice and sound unstable in a room that would remember their calm more than my pain. What they were not ready for was silence. Silence made them keep talking, and people like Dana and Leon always tell on themselves when they mistake quiet for defeat. So I took the key. I let the attorney hand me one thin envelope with the shed deed, a parcel sketch, and a typed description of the structure. Weathered, utility status unknown. No independent septic, no habitable warranty. Reading it felt like watching someone summarize my place in that family. Useful for storage, not meant for living, barely worth listing. When we stood to leave, Dana touched my sleeve and gave me the kind of sad smile people practice in mirrors. "Try not to make this ugly, Nora. Grandma wanted peace." Peace. Another word people bend when they mean obedience. I drove straight to the shed because I had nowhere else to put what had just happened. The key stuck twice before the lock gave in. The door dragged over the floorboards with a sound like something old clearing its throat. Inside, and the place was colder than outside, and smelled like cedar, dust, and machine oil. My grandmother had used it for tools years ago, then for seed trays, then for whatever she did not want other people touching. There was one workbench under the back window, a metal sink with no running water, a stack of feed buckets, 2 shelves of canning jars, and an old stool with one repaired leg. Light came in thin through the side slats. The whole place leaned slightly left, like it was tired of standing but too stubborn to fall. And still, it felt more honest than the table I had just left. This is the part people who have never lived through family contempt do not understand. Sometimes the smallest thing feels like mercy simply because it does not lie to you. The shed was rough, cold, and half useless. But it was not pretending to love me while calculating what I was worth. That made it easier to breathe in than the house I'd grown up visiting. I came back the next morning with a flashlight, gloves, bottled water, and the kind of anger that makes cleaning feel like prayer. I swept out leaves and dead moths. I wiped dust from the workbench. I found old labels in my grandmother's handwriting, twine, seed catalogs, a cracked mug, and a nail apron hanging behind the door. Every small thing said the same thing in a different voice. She worked here. She trusted this place. She kept part of herself where no one noisy would bother to look. That hurt more than the hearing had. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. The people who loved being seen never valued the spaces where real work happened. Dana loved the front porch. Leon loved the tractor. Neither of them would have spent 10 minutes in that shed unless someone told them there was cash under the floorboards. That is how greed often works in families. Outsiders imagine villains waking up and choosing cruelty like a costume. Real life is messier. Most selfish people do not call themselves selfish. They rename what they do until they can live with it. Taking becomes managing. Controlling becomes protecting. Excluding becomes keeping things simple. By the time they are done, they have built a moral language that lets them sleep at night. Dana did not think she stole the center of my grandmother's life. She thought she had inherited what suited her. Leon did not think he was squeezing me out. He thought he was handling property like a practical man. The lie was cleaner that way. By late afternoon, I had cleared enough space to sit on the stool and drink from my water bottle in the quiet. That was when I noticed the back wall. Not because it looked broken, because one metal hinge on the cabinet above the workbench had newer screws than the others. Tiny difference. Easy to miss. The sort of thing only stands out when a room teaches you to look slowly. I opened the cabinet. Seed envelopes, twine, an old ledger book, a folded feed invoice. Nothing dramatic. But when I pulled the ledger free, something clicked behind the thin wood panel at the back. I froze, then slid my fingers along the grain until I found a shallow notch. The panel lifted out into my hand. Behind it sat a small tin box, a sealed envelope, and a second key taped to an index card. The card had 5 words on it. Not the house. Read first. I sat down so hard the stool groaned under me. My grandmother's handwriting was broad and clean, the kind that looked calm even when it carried bad news. I did not open the envelope right away. I held it in both hands and looked at my own name written there until my breathing steadied. If you have spent enough time being dismissed, even good fortune can feel dangerous at first. You wait for the trick. You wait for the part where hope makes you look foolish. Finally, I broke the seal. Nora, if Dana and Leon left the lawyer's office satisfied, then this worked exactly the way I needed it to. Let them keep the house. Let them keep the furniture they will polish for guests. Let them keep the orchard rows they can point at from the porch and pretend they understand. The part I wanted you to have is not what looks valuable. It is what makes the rest of it function. I read that paragraph 3 times, Then I opened the tin box. Inside were 6 folded documents, a county map, and a yellowed folder marked Utility and Access Summary. The first page was a recorded maintenance and access agreement. The second was a water use easement. The third was a signed approval restriction tied to parcel division and commercial lease changes. By the fourth page, my hands had started shaking for a completely different reason than before. The shed parcel was not just the footprint under the building. It included the service lane that ran behind the orchard and connected the lower gate to the road. It included the pump access point for the irrigation system. It included signature rights for any future split, sale, or outside lease affecting the orchard utility corridor. Macan, and folded into the back of the county map was a lease summary tied to a solar company that had been negotiating seasonal ground use near the west edge, a lease that could not move forward without the consent of the holder of the utility and access parcel. Me. My grandmother had not left me the ugly leftover. She had left me the part every profitable plan still had to cross. I spread the map across the workbench and stared until the shapes stopped swimming. The farmhouse sat on the pretty part. The orchard sat on the visible part. But the gravel lane, the irrigation controls, the service access, the utility corridor, and the consent language, all traced back through the narrow strip attached to the shed. Dana and Leon had taken the loud property. I had the functional property. That difference changes everything. I'd people chase ownership because ownership photographs well. They say, "This is mine." They point. They post. They brag. But the deeper question is always this: what does the thing depend on? What must remain open, signed, maintained, or approved for any of it to keep working? That is where real power sits. Not in what is admired, in what is required. Not in the front porch. In the valve, the road, the switch, the corridor, the line nobody notices until it is blocked. The next document hit harder than the easement papers. It was a receipt packet, certified mail, signed deliveries, one to Dana, one to Leon, one to the attorney's office, all sent 11 months before my grandmother died. Each one acknowledged the recorded agreements tied to the west boundaries service parcel. Each one warned that any representation of the orchard property as fully independent would be false. Leon had signed his receipt. Dana had signed hers. They knew, not guessed, not discovered too late. Knew. I laughed once, a short sound without humor, because suddenly the hearing came back to me with different lighting. The smirk, the fake sympathy, the careful phrases. It had all been built on one assumption. They thought if they made the visible estate sound complete enough, I would never understand the piece I had been handed. They did not just count on my silence. They counted on my ignorance. The phone signal at the shed came and went, so I drove into town and called the number listed on the lease summary from a diner parking lot. A woman named Rebecca answered. The moment I gave my name, she became very careful. "Ms. Hale, or were you told to call after the estate meeting?" "After. Not if. After." "Yes. Then you'll want to speak with Ms. Brenner before you sign or respond to anything. There's also a note in your file that direct inquiries from Dana Hart or Leon Hale are to be documented but not discussed." I leaned back against the driver's seat and closed my eyes. My grandmother had planned not just the gift, but the timing of it. She knew exactly what kind of people they were. She knew they would reach for what looked large and leave the wiring behind. Ms. Brenner met me that afternoon in a small office over a hardware store. She was the kind of lawyer who did not waste movement. No performance, no false warmth. She read the documents once, then laid the map flat between us and tapped the narrow strip behind the orchard. "This," she said, "is why they were in a hurry." I waited. The house is attractive, the orchard is marketable, but the service lane, irrigation access, and utility corridor are burden points. Without your consent, They cannot cleanly divide, refinance, expand commercial use, or finalize the solar ground lease. They own the visible asset. You own the dependency. Dependency, that was the word. She turned another page. And if these certified notices were received, then any attempt to represent the property as free and clear of these limitations is not a misunderstanding. It's concealment. By the time I left her office, the day had started changing shape. The story Dana and Leon thought they were living was already running into reality. Ms. Brenner had checked public filings while I sat there. 2 hours earlier, Leon had reached out to a lender using the orchard value in a collateral discussion. Review flagged the access and utility approvals. Paused. Dana had emailed a broker about reviving the solar conversation my grandmother had been negotiating. The company asked for confirmation on the West Corridor Signature Authority. Also paused. They had not made it through one afternoon. My phone lit up the first time while I was still in the parking lot. Dana. I let it ring out. Then Leon. Then Dana again. Then a number I did not know, which I assumed was the attorney finally discovering that paper has a long memory. On the fifth call, I answered because by then I had enough truth in front of me to speak without spending any of myself. Leon started talking before I said hello. What exactly did she leave you? There it was. Not how are you? Not we should talk. Just the question stripped clean. I looked through the windshield at the hardware store sign, chipped blue paint, late sun falling across the lot, and said, "The part that still works." Silence. Then, "Don't be dramatic. This is a technical issue." "No," I said. "It's a recorded one." His breathing changed, sharper, controlled, but not by much. "The irrigation line crosses that parcel." "I know." "The lease discussion included the West Corridor." "I know." The lender froze everything over paperwork. "Over disclosure," I said. Different word. He went quiet long enough for me to picture his face hardening. When he spoke again, his voice had that old family tone in it, the one meant to remind me I was supposed to fold when an older voice got firm. "What do you want?" Not an apology. Not even fairness in the emotional sense. Men like Leon only become practical when consequence arrives. So I answered practically. "I want the estate record corrected anywhere the property was described as fully independent. I want any commercial discussion paused until counsel is copied. I want written acknowledgement that the West parcel agreements were known before the hearing. And I want no more direct pressure from either of you." "Nora." He said my name like a warning. I hung up. A lot of people hearing this kind of story want the bloodier ending. They want scorched earth. They want humiliation returned with interest. I understand that instinct. When you've been made small long enough, revenge can feel like oxygen. But there is a difference between being finally powerful and becoming ruled by the wound. My grandmother did not leave me a trap so I could become cruel. She left me a structure so the truth could stand up on its own legs. That distinction mattered to me more with every hour. Because the real gift was becoming clear now, and it was bigger than the parcel itself. My grandmother had trusted me with the piece that demanded judgment. Not vanity, not showmanship, judgment. Anyone can spend money. Not everyone can hold leverage without letting it rot them from the inside. By the end of the week, the attorney's office had issued an amended property summary to the lender and the solar company. The language changed in all the places it had needed to. Not independent. Subject to recorded access, utility, and approval terms. Leon's refinancing plans stalled. In Dana's neat fantasy of turning grief into a branded orchard experience for weekend tourists, stalled with it. Funny how quickly certainty fades when a sentence has to be rewritten in public. They did not stop calling, but the calls changed. That was almost satisfying enough on its own. The early ones were angry. The middle ones were persuasive. By the last round, they sounded tired. Tired people are often the closest thing entitled people ever come to honest. Dana left a voicemail saying we were all under a lot of pressure. Leon sent a message saying my grandmother never intended for legal technicalities to divide the family. That almost made me smile. People who divide a family with greed always blame the paperwork when the paperwork refuses to protect them. 2 Sundays later, I went back to the shed alone. The place still leaned. The light still came in thin. Dust still settled on everything faster than it should have. But it no longer looked like the insult they had handed me across that table. It looked like a sentence my grandmother had written in wood, iron, and patience. Look again. Not everything valuable announces itself in a voice loud enough for selfish people to hear it. I sat at the workbench with her letter open one more time and let myself feel the part I had pushed aside while dealing with lawyers and maps. Grief. Not the dramatic kind, the useful kind. The kind that comes when you realize someone saw you clearly while they were still alive and built something to protect that truth after they were gone. That is what undid me in the end. Not the value of the lease, not the pause on Dana's plans, not even Leon being forced to speak through counsel. It was this. In a family full of people who measured love by access, performance, and control, my grandmother had measured it by trust. She gave the house to the person who wanted to be seen in it. She let the man who needed to feel important take the machinery and the titles. And she gave me the narrow strip everyone overlooked, because she knew I would understand the difference between owning a stage and holding the wiring behind it. I kept the shed. That surprised them more than the documents had. I also kept the lane rights, the utility approvals, and the lease consent until I had terms I could live with. Months later, when I finally sat down with the solar company, I did not sign out of panic, and I did not refuse out of spite. I negotiated from clarity. Better maintenance commitments, better seasonal restrictions, better numbers. Most of all, better language. Language that could not be bent later by people who only respected a sentence after it cost them money. The farmhouse still stands. Dana still lives there last I heard. Leon still drives the truck. They got the parts people notice first. I got the part that decides what happens next. And maybe that is the truest inheritance anyone can leave you. Not cash, not land, not even revenge. Just the right to remain unblurred in a story other people were already preparing to tell without you. They thought they had taken everything that mattered. They were wrong. They took the picture. I kept the part that still made it work. Thank you for listening to this story with me. If it touched you, please don't forget to like this video and follow the channel for more stories like this. And most importantly, leave a comment below with your thoughts, how this story made you feel, and what you would have done in their place.